here. This works is the copied Mysterio. 75% of the time, it works every time. Got him. Safest room. Sif, discard Sif. No, Sif's discard trigger happens before the clothing mats. We're also winning the left without the discard trigger, but sequencing is noteworthy here. You get here and thinking about against the spot is, what does our linear draw look like? And good lord, is our linear draw freaking impressive this game. Marvel Snap's new season is here, bringing with it a new card release via the season pass in Gwenpool, a 4/6 whose on reveal picks a card in your hand 3 times to give it +2 power. It's noteworthy that the way this functions, she can pick the same card 3 times, giving it +6, or she could spread out these +2s across 3 different cards if there's that many cards in your hand. This brings me to the first thing that's felt very true about Gwenpool decks as I'm playing them, and that she is more powerful the fewer cards that are in your hand when you play her. This gives you a more controlled variance over what is getting the bonuses, which in turn gives you a higher likelihood of hitting a high impact card with her bonus, such as Mysterio or Sebastian Shaw, as well as making it more likely that you're going to be able to play out everything that she's given a bonus to over the course of the game. It's important that you're able to actually get the cards that she buffs onto the board, because obviously you need the extra stats since a base 4/6 is not particularly good. That being said, the ceiling that she offers of being a 4/12 is quite strong, and when you mix in different synergy elements, she really feels quite good. I mentioned 2 of those synergy elements a moment ago. Sebastian Shaw obviously working very directly. He turns her +2 into a +4, but Mysterio, a little bit more to understand there. Whenever you give Mysterio a bonus either in your hand or in your deck, that bonus doesn't just apply to the real Mysterio, it applies to the clones as well. In practice, what this means is every time you put +2 from Gwenpool onto a Mysterio, you get +6 points of power on the board. And in some incredible high roll situation that you can set up, you can get all 3 of Gwenpool's trigger onto Mysterio, which can provide you with a 10 power real Mysterio and 2 6 power Mysterio clones, telling Dr. Doom to go eat his heart out. I've already logged almost double-digit hours with Gwenpool since the season rolled over, and I cleared my way all the way back to infinite rank on day 1, playing only decks featuring her that we're going to go through in a minute. And honestly, she is so much better and more fun than I was expecting her to be. I thought she was going to be a playable competitive card in a deck or 2, and I have almost half a dozen different deck highlights that I'm excited to showcase on my gameplay highlight over the course of the next week of Gwenpool doing lots of different neat and powerful things. Our first deck list is the one I used to clear back through the 90s to infinite with, and it features Hitmonkey in addition to Gwenpool. Both of these cards synergize with Mysterio quite well, so I wanted to see if I could take these 2 great flavors and see if they tasted great together. I also wanted to lean as heavily as possible into maximizing Gwenpool's effect as much as I can. So we have Psylocke to Gwenpool on turn 3, so we can beast her back on 4 to then play her again on 5 before playing our Hitmonkey and Mysterio on 6. We also have Absorbing Man and Grandmaster to duplicate Gwenpool's effect again, as well as copy our other valuable on reveals. Absorbing Man even provides a secondary Hitmonkey in a pinch. Really, this deck list was a ton of fun, and it got to put some double-digit Mysterios into play that were absolutely massive in some very sweet games of Marvel Snap. 2 key cards to call out in this deck list are Wasp as well as Makari. These cards serve that primary purpose that I talked about earlier of helping our hand size get small so we can be more consistent about getting that Gwenpool bonus onto Mysterio so we could triple up its effect to great effect. A number of the higher series cards of this deck are definitely flexible if they're missing in your collection, with Hitmonkey being the only one I would define as must-have. Makari, White Widow, and even Grandmaster, I think, can all be substituted for other 1 or 2 energy cards that ideally have on-reveal effects that you can duplicate with Beast, picking them up and putting them back down, with the most important goal being you want to be playing cards out of your hand early, so Gwenpool's triggers can be finding Mysterio as often as we draw them together. The next Gwenpool shell is probably my personal favorite of all the ones I've played so far, featuring Moon Girl. This deck list essentially wants to play Gwenpool on turn 4 to apply her bonus to cards in our hand, and then we double up that bonus with Moon Girl, allowing Gwenpool to easily generate 18 or more points of power for us to play out on the final turn of the game, especially in situations where we get Mysterio buffed by Gwenpool and then duplicated by Moon Girl, or Sebastian Shaw pops off. This deck list has an incredibly wide output range that's very difficult for your opponent to calculate on the last turn of the game, giving you really solid cube equity. As far as higher series cards go in this deck, I think Sebastian Shaw and Mockingbird are the most important to have access to outside of Gwenpool, because they're responsible for a lot of the numbers that this deck is generating. The others, Makari, Spider-Ham, Nico Minoru, and Grandmaster, can be subbed out for other cheaper cards that you can again be playing out on curve early, so that way when you're eventually Gwenpooling and Moongirling, you have control over what you're powering up and what you're duplicating. This next Gwenpool shell isn't doing anything fancy, it's just a more generic good stuff deck list that's looking to play Gwenpool as her base for 12 that occasionally gets extra value on the back of pumping up Mysterio, who this deck also uses to enable both Mockingbird and Sasquatch. The kind of ideal setup that this deck list is looking to do is Gwenpool on 4, Big Mysterio on 5, and then Mockingbird plus Sasquatch plus potentially a tech card like Rogue or Luke Cage on the last turn of the game to close out with a big flourish. This deck list I jokingly called Pay to Win Gwen when I was playing it on stream, because it contains an absolute metric ton of Series 5 cards that are just like generically good, flexible things in a variety of situations. Our next take is a Gwenpool discard Surfer deck that stands out in my mind as being the most competitive Gwenpool thing I've played so far. The big thing that I was really surprised at as I played lots of games with this is just how powerful it felt inside of the games where Silver Surfer was nowhere to be found. Traditionally speaking, Surfer decks usually struggle to put numbers into play when their namesake is buried at the bottom of the deck, and thanks to Gwenpool, Strong Guy, Proxima Midnight, Brood, and others, this deck list was putting massive numbers into play even when Silver Surfer was buried at the bottom of my deck. In addition to Gwenpool, Makari, and Proxima Midnight, I think are the really important higher series cards to have for this deck to operate at maximum potential. Proxima Midnight is essentially 7 points of power for 0 energy, and Makari always gets herself into play for free and is 6 points of power thanks to Silver Surfer powering her up. Makari getting your hand empty makes sure Gwenpools more consistently hit the things you want to hit, and makes it so your Strong Guy is more likely to be 9 points for just 3 energy. Dakin and Sebastian Shaw, while providing solid numbers, can definitely be substituted out for other 3 energy stat sticks or utility cards that you see fit for. My next Gwenpool take is a more traditional variation on Surfer, featuring Brood alongside Absorbing Man and things like Hope Summers to give us extra energy on those last turns of the game. It's also doing some especially adorable things like Okoye and Nakia to make it so your Broods and Sebastian Shaws really get punched into overdrive. The thing that stood out in my mind as I was playing this particular variation of Surfer is all of the concealed power that you're generating with things like Gwenpool and Nakia really give this archetype a huge amount of cube equity that didn't previously have. One of the reasons that Silver Surfer could struggle, especially against better players, is it was often very telegraphed exactly how many stats you were going to be getting on turn 6 and where those stats were going to be, because your opponent could count what your likely output range is. Because so many of your stats are kept in your hand until the last moments of the game with this build, that becomes much more difficult to do, even for someone that really knows exactly what you're doing. Once again, I think Makari is very important for the shell. She gets pumped by Silver Surfer and helps you manage your hand size nicely for Gwenpool. Similarly, Sebastian Shaw is one of the key ways this deck makes bigger numbers, so I think he is a must-have if you want to operate at maximum efficiency. Other higher series cards in this deck, such as Hope Summers, Fastos, and Grandmaster, I think could easily be swapped around for other 3 energy utility cards, or something like Goose at the 2 energy slot that would be disruptive that you can play on curve. The last Gwenpool deck that kind of impressed me was slotting her into a traditional take on discard. There's 2 primary things that she felt quite good at doing in this deck. The first is when you get her points of power onto Swarm and then you discard the Swarm to copy it, you get to multiply the points of power that she's adding to the board. The second, and this felt like a big deal on a number of occasions, is that this is a deck list that often doesn't mind drawing Gwenpool even on the last turn of the game. You'll have Dracula in play, you'll have an Apocalypse in hand, and you'll play Gwenpool out, putting 6 points of power on Apocalypse, which then gets discarded to the Dracula to give you an even more massive 4 energy card. This flexibility made it so getting 12 points worth of power or more off of Gwenpool was incredibly consistent. As far as higher series cards go, I would say both Proxima and MODOK are important for this deck to punch at an appropriate power level, while some of its scalers at the bottom end of the curve, specifically Meek and Dakin, either of them could be subbed out for Collector, who can grow in a similar manner. Past the decks that I enjoyed with Gwenpool, I wanted to call out some other things that I tried where she felt like she could maybe fit, but ultimately ended up feeling a bit too clunky. The first of these is the Gwenpool Patriot kind of shell. There's a lot of cards in here, Mysterio, Mr. Sinister, and Brood, that all look good with Gwenpool on the surface, but when you actually start executing the deck in practice, it starts to become really clunky because you quickly realize that in a perfect world, you really want to be playing these cards out early on turns 2 and 3, not after you play Gwenpool. After you play Gwenpool out, you really want to be slamming things like Iron Lad or Iron Man or other bigger things, making it much harder to take advantage of Gwenpool's extra stats. I think this Patriot style deck in and of itself isn't bad, but Gwenpool really felt clunky, and I would be surprised long term if she ends up being optimal in it. Similarly, there's a bunch of people that cut Arnim Zola from the top end of the Destroy deck and have slotted Gwenpool inside of it. While Gwenpool obviously can have some incredible high roll games where you play her and she powers up Deadpool a bunch on turn 4 and then you double up that bigger Deadpool on turn 5, I think those hits are going to be few and far between, and the Destroy deck's going to have a lot of games where you have things like Null and Death in your hand that are getting minimal value from Gwenpool being pumped on it. I think this feels like a clean-cut example of taking a card that like kind of works in an established good deck and shoving it in where it ultimately doesn't belong. Finally, we have this Wong Shuri Nimrod amalgamation that was putting up some metrics on Untapped, and after I played with this deck a bunch, I came to 2 conclusions. The first was that this deck dies to a stiff breed as far as tech cards are concerned. There's Enchantresses and Rogues for your Wongs, there's Cosmos, there's Shang-Chi's, there's Shadow Kings, all sorts of things can ruin your day, and even past all of that, Gwenpool isn't even very good in this deck, and basically any situation where I had Shuri and Gwenpool in hand, Shuri was always better, and when I had Gwenpool and not Shuri, my hand regularly had so many cards in it that it was difficult to consistently get Gwenpool to go on to Black Panther and Nimrod, which was the only 2 places I really wanted her bonus. All in all, I have to say that I am absolutely loving Gwenpool as a card. She synergizes with some of my favorite cards like Mysterio and Moon Girl, and she has so many interesting both deck building decisions and in-game sequencing decisions that allow you to min-max her effect to greater extents. As always, the Season Pass is one of the absolute best values in Marvel Snap. If you're someone who's spending any amount of money on this game, the first $10 you spend should definitely go to it all of the time. That being said, if you're someone that doesn't buy every pass and you pick or choose based on how good, bad, or interesting the card is, I think Gwenpool has the potential to both be good and she's definitely interesting in the long term. As always, if you enjoyed my breakdown on this subject, all the decks in today's roundup, snap that like button and make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of my Marvel Snap updates here many times per week. Oh, also, there's Twitch drops going on for Marvel Snap right now. You get an exclusive Wolverine variant as well as some extra credits. Be sure to drop by my channel, twitch.tv/Jeff Hoagland, where I'm going to be streaming an incredibly unhealthy amount this week.